It looks like most people have joined, so I will make a start. So welcome everyone to this third part of our Enabling Water Smart Communities Spring Webinar Series. My name is Kat Moncrieff and I will be chairing today's webinar. I'm from CIWEM. So CIWEM are part of the Enabling Water Smart Communities project. We lead the communications and engagement for the project. And just so you know, CIWEM is the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management, and we're a Royal Chartered professional body and independent charity dedicated to sustainable management of the environment. So this is the third of 5 webinars in the Project Spring series. And the aim of this series is to share progress with and findings from the project's enabling actions, which are trying to overcome the barriers to water smart communities. The webinar today is going to introduce the Water Efficient Home Guidance, which is a new guide being developed through the Good Homes Alliance. And this guide is going to support house builders, architects, contractors, and their supply chains to deliver water efficient solutions and maximize water reuse in new housing developments. The session is also going to provide an update on enablers for mainstreaming water recycling in new developments, and also share an update on some of the case studies we've been gathering into a database. So before I get into the project, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping details. So the meeting's been recorded. If you have any objections to this recording being made public, please do let us know. If you experience any technical issues and need assistance, please raise your hand using the chat feature on Zoom. Let us know what the problem is. And we'll take your questions at the end of the presentation. So if you want to make a comment or ask a question, please put that in the Q&A facility. So there's a chat facility for technical issues and then a Q&A facility for your questions and comments. And then I'll be taking those at the end of the presentations. Okay, so with me today, I have Saffron Corcoran, who's a graduate environment engineer at Thames Water, and also George Warren, an integrated water manager at Anglian Water. And I'm going to do a quick introduction to the project and then pass over to Saffron, who's going to speak about the Water Efficient Homes Guide. And then we'll pass on to George, who's going to give an update on the reuse elements of the project. And then we'll move on to Q&A. Okay, and so just a quick introduction to the Enabling Water Smart Communities project. For those who haven't heard about it, I appreciate that some of you may have heard about it already, but I just want to bring everyone up to speed. So it's an Ofwat innovation project, and it's exploring the relationship between integrated water management, community practices, and housing development. So its aim is to unlock opportunities for delivering water smart communities and ensuring the long-term stewardship of water. It's funded through the Transform stream of the Ofwat Innovation Project, and you can see there that we've got many delivery partners involved, including water companies, academic research institutions. WaterWise have been involved in some of the work we've done today, Good Homes Alliance as well, and Public First. We also have an independent program board which guides the project, and that's made up of some developer organizations as well as relevant government bodies. And just very quickly, I just want to debunk some jargon. So what do we mean by a water smart community? So in this project, we're essentially defining it as where water related assets and systems like rainwater harvesting and sustainable drainage are included at the design stage and built into the fabrication of a place. But it's also about members of the community really understanding, valuing, and taking ownership of those assets and systems so that we enhance the value of water and cultivate more sustainable water use. And so why do we need this project? So I'm sure many of you will be familiar with some of these news items on the slide here. Essentially, we're trying to tackle these kind of issues so that the issues that are shared between the water and housing sector. And these issues include water scarcity. So we're facing a 4.8 billion litre per day deficit in water by 2050 if we don't take any action on that. But also as climate change bites, the risk of flooding is rising as well. And in other areas, we're seeing that a lack of sewage capacity is also thwarting house building. So the project is looking at ways that we can overcome these issues to housing growth and looking at these issues in a holistic and integrated way. It's also looking at how we can mainstream smart approaches such as water reuse, rainwater harvesting, and sustainable drainage into all new homes. So just as a quick introduction to some of the things we'll be talking about today, the initial discovery phase of the project, we looked at a number of case studies, interviewed people, interviewed different experts and things, and we explored the various perspectives and challenges around water smart communities. And as a result of that, we came up with what we thought were blockers to enabling water smart communities, and therefore the enabling actions that are needed to overcome those blockers. And these are the enabling actions that we're working on today, and you can see them on the tiles on this slide. And today we're focusing on assets in particular, so looking at on-site reuse, and then the guide that Saffron's going to introduce also talks about the types of water efficient assets that will be needed to enable water smart communities. So I think I'll stop there with my introduction and pass over to Saffron now.
Thank you very much, Kat. So I'm Saffron Corcoran, as Kat said, and I've been working on a project that looks at creating a guidance document for local authorities, architects, developers, and so forth, to help steer these institutes and companies to be more efficient in the use of potable water and more sustainable in their water management. If you don't mind moving the slide along for me. So as Kat said previously, we know the UK is growing more in a water deficit. There is so much research about this, more news articles, and it's becoming more evidence in day-to-day life. And we've also seen that new targets have been set out. So we need to reduce the amount of water used per person per day to a target of 90 litres in new homes by, that should be 2030. Apologies about that. But we are currently already at a max of about 120 litres per person per day. So quite a big detriment we need to deal with. And we noticed when looking at this of recent that there is a lack of up-to-date practical guidance on how to reduce water stress in new developments and also previous developments. And the new and existing technology that's already out there that hasn't been implemented on a mass scale. Would you mind moving the slides along for me? So the project aims to create this document that will be a guidance document on practical and useful technology and even policies that various companies like water companies like Thames Water ourselves have already to help these people like developers, architects, contractors, LAs and so forth to design new buildings and retrofit homes that already exist in a better way. So looking at how we can retrofit the homes with new devices that would limit leaky taps and so forth, that we know is one of the most prevalent problems within Thames Water ourselves. And I'm sure if you talk to any other water companies could speak for that as well. It's also looking at how we could improve the technology that's used in new developments. So can we get rain catching systems? Can we introduce recycled water and so forth into these areas? And it's looking at how we can meet or exceed best practice targets. So we can exceed the policy timelines, so we can meet that deadline of 2030 with the 90 litres per person per day. Would you mind moving the slides along for me?
I'm sorry, it's just glitching at the moment, so you may have to.
That's okay.
Just carry on. I'm not quite sure what's happened.
That's okay. So
hang on.
I will visually explain. I would like for you all to imagine a triangle for me that has 3 layers. So if none of you have ever heard, there is something called the water neutrality hierarchy. And this is based by a triangle upside down. There we go. We have it visually now. And we have created the guidance document to follow this triangle of neutrality. So just to walk through a bit more of this is step 1 is to reduce your water usage. And we wanted to ensure that, you know, the institutes and the companies and everyone we're aiming for with this document to understand that to get to level 2, so reusing water, you need to A, have water efficient devices, smart metering, and water saving culture. So essentially the document is going to be based around, okay, if you have them 3, look at how you can then get to step 2, which is reuse water. So how could you integrate rainwater harvesting, grey water recyclement, and black water recyclement? And then step 3, which we do have some case studies for in the guidance document, is offsetting water then. So to bulk out the guidance document, to explain it, is we have created it to be engaging for the reader and digestible. We didn't want it to be printed, sits on, you know, the side of a table and never used. We wanted to start out and address the why, which Kat has mentioned earlier. We're in a crisis of water. We've also explained why we need this document, as in people don't know about some of these technologies or aren't aware that you can implement them on a wide scale. And then this is where our water neutrality hierarchy comes in. The document follows this 3-level tiered approach. So the bulk of this document is case studies, and all these case studies link to these different levels. A, the reduce water, B, level 2, reuse water, and level 3, offset. The mass amount of these case studies do link with level 2, which is reuse of water, something that we can see is clearly being used more and more, but we need to push forward a lot more, which is why we've got the bulk there. Level 3 offset water is something that we aim to achieve further and further and further on as we go in the next few years. But it's something that we need to have a lot more of reuse first to be able to do. If you wouldn't mind moving the slide on, if it would work for me. If not, I can rattle on without. Perfect. So to dive into the case studies a little bit more, and just to also highlight, George will be going on to case studies a lot more, as there is some further work with enabling smart water communities with case studies. And some of these will be within our document. The bulk of the document, as I said, focuses on case studies. And we had various boundary conditions for these. We wanted them to be recent, so built in the last 10 years. So we know they are the most recent technology. They've had time to settle in. We have evidence to prove that they do work. We wanted them to be in various different types of residential properties or developments. So we have some from care homes to small scale homes of 8 homes to developments that are about 359 properties. So we can show that these technologies and policies and ideas work on such a various scale. We wanted to have innovative ideas or technologies. So sometimes we don't have necessarily the things that you would think are the most prevalent or used, but that's the whole point. We don't want you to just think inside the box. Let's start thinking outside the box. That's how we're going to make change. And then we also have the date, data on it, or as much data as we could collate. Estimated data as well from the actual producers or developers of these projects, and water savings. So we've asked them to give us the data on how much water was saved or how much they're estimating to be saved. As you can see, we've also got various locations. So we've got London, Salford, Cambridge, and we have various different innovations. So smart water metering, rainwater harvesting, grey water, recyclement, and so forth. If you wouldn't mind moving the slide on for me. Towards the end of the document, we know it might be a little bit hard for them to, sit down and read every case study every single time they want to go through. So we are building a model specification. So this model specification, as I said, will be at the end of the document, and it will highlight the different technological solutions and their requirements. So what I mean by requirements is how they fit into the systems, the minimum amount of water they might even need. It's also looking at how they link with the areas around and if they need anything specific. So they might need specific data, overlooks and so forth. It will be supplemented with additional details like the water usage and a description as well of how that technology works. If you wouldn't mind moving the slide along for me. So the fun thing about this is it's not completely finished yet. This is our draft opening guidance page, so our cover page essentially. This document will officially be launched on the 10th of July with an evening event. And I'm happy to say if you would like to attend, you can. So I have a QR code here that will take you to the page to register, or there is the link which has been popped into the chat. And I can further sell this by saying there is maybe perhaps snacks and drinks. So it'd be great for you to come along, and you will be able to ask questions as well and get a first actual look. The guidance document will also be freely available to download online. So it offers that practicality of having the tools to help people and institutes to act on that reduction of water usage and become more sustainable, free of charge. And that's the whole point. We want to drive it to how you can reuse your water and reduce your water demand. And I think that's me.
Thanks, Saffron.
Thanks.
Over to George.
Geez, look at that for timing, Saffron. I mean, geez, you've even got a minute to spare. You've done well. Afternoon, everybody. So I'm George Warren. I'm the Integrated Water Manager here at Anglian Water. And I'm going to delve into a bit more on the water reuse side that Saffron spoke about there, or level 2 in the water neutrality hierarchy. So first, I'll just give you a recap as to other stuff we've already presented on in previous webinars on this. So just to recap, we've been doing a fair bit of work on water reuse. So we developed up an economic case with Public First, which looked at the impact of water scarcity on housing growth in the south and east of England, which was estimated, I can see an error there. It should say 25 billion over the next 5 years. Apologies for that. And yet, if we were to deliver those new houses at a to incorporate water reuse, we could recoup the best part of 20 billion of that, making an economic case for us to incorporate reuse, I would hope. We also carried out a public opinion survey of 4,000 UK residents in the autumn of 24, which came back with almost overwhelming willingness to use recycled water, in particular around the use of rainwater for WC flushing, but actually there was still a large proportion interested in the likes of irrigation and cooling systems and the likes. And you can see there a little graphic, purposely small, but please have a look at the this report is currently published and on our website. We also have done a piece of work looking at the capital costs of incorporating reuse within new development. We took a range of developments ranging in scale from 40 up to 600 properties and redesigned those, and 9 property typologies, so 1-bedroom apartments up to 5-bedroom such properties, and looked at the additional financial burden associated with incorporating reuse schemes into that, which came out as sort of community stormwater harvesting, even at 40 properties, was more financially viable than individual plot by plot. But yeah, you can have a look at the reports on there for further information. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we go about mainstreaming this. So can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. And let's go for another slide on then as well then. So I'm going to talk about this roadmap. So the question has to be asked as to how do we go about doing this? And so we aim to draw up a roadmap to identify the key actions needed to progress community scale water reuse. So we identified challenges and then actions needed to address them, plus identifying those that sat outside of the water company's control. A key recognition from the outset was that the way forward would require an holistic approach covering political, environmental, social, technological, legal and economic issues. In addition to this, the current interpretation of wholesomeness within legislation was resulting in an impasse. So we're very aware of that and we're addressing that. So can I have the next slide, please? One of the things that was quite clear was that a lot of those actions sat actually outside of a water company's control. And so we brought together regulators for a roundtable event later on the following year. Later on that year. And looked through those various different elements that are identified there. Can I have the next slide, please? And what came out the back of it was a roadmap. Now, as soon as you put a roadmap together, it becomes out of date. And there's certainly elements of this which haven't necessarily gone as we had envisaged. So we are actually looking to revise this shortly, as we believe that the consultation, well, building regs consultation hasn't quite come out quite when we assumed it would. And we were expecting a consultation around the wholesomeness issue to come out at the same time, if not before. That appears to have been pushed back till after the building regs piece. And obviously that will have a large impact going forward. But if you could flicker the slide on there, what we're going to talk about here today is specifically around this one source of truth or single source of truth document that we've created, and a bit of skills scoping study that we've gone into there, which are 2 key areas that we've highlighted there. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so single source of truth document, next slide. So very mindful of the fact that there is a lot of information on this slide. It is not for you necessarily to digest. It's probably just to give you the impression that there's a lot of different things going on. So this report attempted to pull together a document that could serve as a single source of truth for those trying to navigate the current legislative and regulatory requirements and guidance for a water reuse scheme. If honest, this has proved challenging. There are areas of ambiguity, possibly because water reuse was not envisaged when primary legislation was drafted, and despite best attempts, it would appear to have proved difficult to overlay new guidance into a regime that is already complex and enforced by different entities. For some aspects of reuse schemes, there is very little to help guide potential practitioners. The reference material that is available is presented in detail within the report, and I'll kind of go through a bit of a snippet of it now with you. Just so current legislative interpretation of the Water Industry Act 1991 and the Water Supply Water Quality Regs 2016 and the Private Water Supply Regulations 2016, which I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar with page to cover. But these indicate that statutory water companies, and also assume NAVs in that, cannot provide domestic reuse schemes, but other entities can. This is to be clarified by DEFRA in the coming months, we understand. And obviously that's the consultation that we refer to when we say the wholesomeness issue. For those that can progress with reuse schemes, so 2 recent British standards for in-house grey water in 2021 and rainwater in 2018 are helpful, but not comprehensive. An older British standard dating back to 2013 also gives guidance on reuse system selection, but is under review. The current building regs refer to water reuse, but if honest, lack detail, although we sincerely hope that new revisions will be proposed we'll have more in those. So it's also to help reduce risk of misidentification of services and potential cross connections and contamination of potable water supplies. The British Standard and NJUG or Streetworks guidance for pipework identification are available, but again, don't cover all permutations related to reuse infrastructure. There's also a lack of information on such issues as pipe testing and integrity of water reuse systems. The water supply water fittings regs require notification of schemes and inspection regime for compliance, which would help mitigate the risk. But if honest, the effectiveness is predicated by the availability of suitably qualified inspectors, of which maybe there aren't quite as many as we'd like. These regulations also provide other guidance on plumbing requirements, such as air gaps, and the Water Regs UK website includes more detail on that. Responsibility for maintaining and checking systems following commission is also opaque. I mean, what I'm trying to get across here is that there is a lot of issues still. There is a lot of guidance out there. And what this document's tried to do is kind of highlight where things are up to date and where maybe there's still some gaps. And I would encourage anyone who's looking at reuse at the minute to have a look at it to make sure that you are looking at the latest guidance, because there are some things that have been withdrawn but aren't quite as clear. Then you can still find them when you Google things. Can I have the next slide, please? So hopefully that comes through. So to help progress the issues highlighted in this report, the following recommendations are proposed. I'm not about to go and read them out per se, but I think one of the things that's really clear is we need to ensure that the opportunity when it comes to the building regs and wholesomeness consultations, that people are responding in a positive nature around the need to incorporate reuse. We made the economic case. We've shown that the public are interested in it. We've shown that actually from a cost perspective, there are ways in which this could be incorporated, and the sort of costs that we spoke about and the capital costs are well within the realms of possibility to be incorporated within environmental incentive programs. The other thing is there needs to be an appropriate mechanism to be able to access the latest information. A lot of the guidance sits behind a paywall, but if we really want people to be taking this forward, that needs to be opened up and provided or available to people. And ultimately, one of the things that we're looking at is around this risk assessment route. So we are just in the process of finalising a reclaimed water safety plan template, which sounds wonderful, doesn't it? But in simple terms, it identifies the hazards and risks associated with reuse at different scales, and identifies potential mitigation measures. Now, this has been put together in the form of a water safety plan template, which can then be picked up and used by other water companies, and also for anyone interested in this field to look at the opportunities to mitigate. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm very aware that I'm not doing as good a job as running through these as quickly as Saffron was. So can I have next slide, please? Okay, so just to talk about the skills scoping study. So we are, as I said before, on that roadmap identified that there were some potential issues around the skills in the workforce to be able to deliver reuse at scale. So this roadmap to reuse work identified the need to improve competency within the construction trades related to installation of water reuse systems. I should mention that this was also highlighted as one of the three major risks to a wider rollout within Cranfield's 2024 report on dual pipe systems that was delivered for Drinking Water Inspectorate. Addressing the barrier will be key to unlocking integrated water management within new residential developments, and the scoping work will help us understand where we are now, who needs to be involved in future skills development, and what the next steps might be. This is purely a scoping exercise. We are not about to develop or deliver a new training regime, but what we need to understand was what's out there and then what needs to be out there. So some of you on this call may well have attended a workshop that was held earlier. Well, in fact, it was last week, apologies. And you'll see there that a number of organisations attended. We're just collating those, the findings from that. But if I could have the next slide, please. There are some sort of emerging themes that are coming out from interviews and that workshop. So, I mean, the availability of skilled and knowledgeable personnel for the installation and maintenance is going to be key, and ultimately the familiarity with systems, regulations, and health and safety requirements. The integration of water reuse into mainstream plumbing curriculum is a really key element there to make sure that all plumbers are aware of it at the very least. And we're seeing a similar sort of rollout when it comes to air source heat pumps at the minute. There needs to be some cross-disciplinary understanding, so making sure that all levels, so all working from commission to design all the way through to maintenance of it, are aware of the wider issues, both in terms of regulations and health and safety requirements. At the present time, anyone could call themselves a plumber in the UK, and maybe there is a need to look at professionalising the industry in that regard, and an accreditation scheme. Something that other countries that have successfully delivered reuse have certainly gone down, and something that I know that the government are currently looking at. When it comes to quality assurance, we are going to need to ensure that there are inspectors available, or the ability to inspect with suitable training in that. We also need to really look at that long-term legacy of systems, as it's important to ensure that stewardship, ownership of the systems to maintain long-term compliance, particularly when it comes to turning over of facilities management staff. Broadly speaking, though, there is a wider skills shortage in the construction and plumbing industry, and this is due to a combination of skilled workers exiting the industry and a lack of uptake. This is a wider challenge that needs addressing and further compounds the issues faced in mainstream water reuse. And timescales and costs of upskilling and training professionals is a big challenge to overcome, and something that we look to try and highlight within this report. So that study will be available later on this summer. Can I have the next slide, please? And I will. Saffron mentioned earlier that we've also been doing some work around case studies. So we are in the process of just finalising a case study map. Could I have the next slide? And I will give you a sort of sneak peek as to what's going on there. So we've pulled together case studies that we're aware of, and sort of key statistics and data around these, and we pulled these into a Power BI report, a dashboard which we're looking to embed within the Enabling Water Smart Communities webpage. This will be available to all to be able to inspect, and also I should add, not just view, but also propose additional data into. We have created this as a snapshot in time, but it will become a live element so that people can actually add data to it and provide new developments as and when. We're hoping that this is useful, both in terms of indicating where you could potentially view and visit such schemes in situ, but also it will help identify, where there's been problems as well. So a lot of the case studies that we were coming across, actually, there are elements that have been turned off, and that's useful for us to understand why that might have come about and how we can look to address those. Like I say, this will be launched onto our website fairly soon, we hope. If I go to the next slide, to give you a sort of insight into one of the developments that we've been working very closely with, and that's South Bank Place on the south bank of the Thames. So if anyone's been to the London Eye, you undoubtedly, if you had turned around and seen the park with the wonderful playground there, is the development just behind that. It's a series of buildings, which we're on to the final one to be delivered. All of them incorporated reuse. Unfortunately, the majority, in fact, the ones that you can see there with an X next to them, they've incorporated reuse, but there's been a series of issues associated with the reuse scheme. Please don't get too alarmed. The issues actually, most of the situations tend to be situated around the connection of foul water into the grey water system, i.e. grey water recycling should just be collecting that off sinks and showers, but it appears that there's been some misconnections so that it's more than just sinks and showers that are connecting into it, which leads to problems at the treatment element. And now once the buildings are occupied and you discover these issues, it's very hard to then trace back where the issues are, and it's something that we need to get better at, because these things will unfortunately happen when there's a lack of understanding. There are ways in which we can mitigate this and reduce that risk. And we're working closely on that final building with the contractor there, who has significant experience of delivering reuse schemes. And when on visit initial visit, it's quite clear that they were serious about this, with the clear demarcation of the pipe work, as you can see there, and exploring opportunities like incorporating QR codes on each of the risers, so that you can bring up the as-built plans that clearly identify which pipes are for what service. It's also quite a legible system in terms of when you get down into the basement, you can tell exactly where things are going and what's happening and what's feeding what. But we're working closely with the contractor and the building owners to understand and monitor that system, as well as trying to address the issues of cross connections in the others. It's interesting when you go to the others, the demarcations of the pipework are not quite as good. And so it's understandable that things may have been misconnected. But this again comes back to the skills piece. Can I have the next slide, please? I think that might even be the end of me, isn't it? There you go. Oh,
it is indeed. Yeah, in perfect time. We have a good chunk of time left for questions. Thank you, Saffron and George. That was a whistle-stop tour through, a huge amount of forthcoming or stuff that already exists, kind of guidance and tools to help us navigate water efficiency and reuse. There is so much there. So I know you've only been able to give a kind of quite high-level introduction, but please do follow the links and the QR codes and delve into these things, because there's a lot there. And a lot of challenges to navigate, I think, but not insurmountable. So if you've got any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. We actually had a few that came through in advance, so maybe we can look at those first, actually. So let me just bring them up. So actually, I think you might have responded to this already, George, but Chris asked, should we mandate dual pipe supply systems with a second pipe supplying recycled water? And if so, how do we overcome the legal issue? So you did touch on this, didn't you?
Yeah, so
is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, so this is related to the wholesome water issue, which I believe is due to be resolved. There's an appetite to do so, helped somewhat by the economic case for resolving it. And in case people weren't aware, this government is a little bit about growth at the minute. So there is an appetite to address that. I don't believe it requires primary legislation changes. I think it's around the definition of wholesomeness and maybe an alternative water quality standards associated with based on the use of it. But I believe that will be addressed over the next 12 to 18 months. In terms of should we be mandating dual supply, I think there's a good case for it, if honest. So one of the things that we spoke about in the previous webinar around costings is that the additional cost of incorporating the internal pipework is around the kind of £350 additional cost per property. Now, the £350 to future-proof a building so that you can plug in a non-potable supply when it's available. Now that I believe is worth doing. And the retrofitting of that pipework, it would be prohibitively expensive and often wouldn't happen. So my view is that we should be future-proofing our homes now to make sure that we can provide that, and where appropriate in those developments, actually provide those community-based systems because it is more efficient on the whole. You can join it up as well with helping to reduce the flood risk elements and impact upon our sewers. So I think there is a good case for it. Now, it's quite hard to mandate it until it's legal to do so. So there is a bit of a step that needs to happen first in that wholesome water, addressing that wholesome water issue. But certainly we're working on the basis that it will come into fruition. And maybe prior to it being mandated, I would sincerely hope that water companies really embrace the opportunities when it comes to environmental incentives to encourage the early adoption of this. It's well within the realms of possibility, within the kind of scale of financial opportunity there. an offer of £2,000 or even potentially more to encourage early adoption of this is, I think in our grasp in that regard.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And Georgia, you mentioned earlier the wholesome water review that DEFRA are doing. Any further update on timings for that?
I haven't seen who's in the meeting.
Or is it?
But I think DEFRA might give us, for anyone who was on the Water Efficiency Forum call that WaterWise hosted yesterday morning, you will have heard those responsible at DEFRA indicating that there is still their proposal to do it this year. They did refer to it as later on this year. Always hard to know whether you're talking calendar years or financial years, but let's assume it's happening in the next 12 months.
Stay optimistic. We also had a couple of questions in about retrofitting reuse. So one from Angela and one from Olasili. So Olasili asked, the guide emphasizes water reuse in new developments. How do you foresee this scaling in retrofit projects for existing housing? And Angela asked, how common is water reuse in retrofitting to older properties? Now, I'm not aware of any case studies of retrofitting reuse.
It depends what we're referring to that reuse for. You utilize that. I think it unlikely, but not impossible, to be retrofitting reuse systems into older developments or existing developments. If you're using that water for a single use, it may be for irrigation. It might be for direct feed into the cooling system or what have you. I think it's unlikely that you're going to see it a direct feed into individual WCs and washing machines and the likes. And like I say, that's because of that additional internal pipe work that needs to bring it there. Hence the reason I think we need to be future-proofing those buildings to help to reduce down the impact of that retrofitting cost going forward. It's really clear. Enabling Water Smart Communities has been quite militant about trying to only look at new residential development. So we're not trying to sway into the retrofit space, and I appreciate that must be frustrating for a lot of people. And we're also not touching on the non-household space. I think when it comes to retrofitting, the lower hanging fruit is actually in the non-household space, where there is greater opportunity for large wins in that space. And I know there's been a lot of work going on in that area. And certainly we as a water company are looking heavily, and as a Thames Water, in retrofitting reuse systems into those arenas. But at the present time, I don't think I see an easy route to be able to retrofit reuse systems to feed WCs in existing residential developments. But let's try and make sure that that's not a continuous issue. Let's ensure that dual pipe network is going in ASAP, so that for all those 1.5 million additional homes that are due to be built over the next 5 years, plus the ones that were already in the plans, those are potentially retrofit issues of the future. We need to make sure that we can address those by putting in that dual pipe work for the mere 350 quid additional cost.
If you don't mind me adding on to that, as we mentioned, we do have a little bit about retrofitting, but we're not talking, as we said, on a large scale of individual toilets in each, property. It's more, how can we suggest to people to change their taps to less leakier ones and so forth, because that is one of the major problems. And one of the case studies within the documents is to do with Greystar and how they have almost like an AI prediction of when people go over, and they send maintenance. So this is one big apartment building, and that's why it works. It's facilitated by one company, they maintain it, they can then go in and do it. It's harder when it's individual properties, as George said, compared to, one dominated large complex, essentially.
Obviously, as future resources become more and more expensive, retrofitting may well become a cheaper option, or for ourselves. And Saffron referred to the water neutrality hierarchy. That third tier is about offsetting, and that offsetting requires retrofitting. So there, although the lower hanging fruit when it comes to retrofitting is those water efficient fixtures and fittings and the identification and addressing of any, customer side leakages and the likes. It may get to a point where actually it does make financial sense to be offsetting in the form of retrofitting reuse into existing buildings. So that's not rule it out entirely, but I think let's just make sure that we're not creating an even bigger retrofitting issue going down the line.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There is an opportunity there, isn't there, with water neutrality requirements? Yeah. We don't have any more questions that I can see in the chat or in the Q&A. So maybe I'll ask a question then, given I've got the floor. Well, I was just wondering, George, whether it'd be useful just to share a little bit more about the whole life cost piece. So you mentioned that you'd done the work looking into the installation costs of reuse schemes at community level. What's the plan to look at whole life costs?
Yeah, so thanks, Kat. And I should have given you that, primed you with that one as well. So as I say, we did the initial capital cost piece. One of the things that we identified during that process, we probably want to have a little look at developments of smaller varieties, because I mentioned there that 40 properties was was more cost efficient than a single property, even at that scale. Quite want to see at what point does it become more efficient to look at community scale compared to, so we're looking at some smaller developments. Also, when it came to, in particular, grey water recycling, it only really stacked up for the really dense developments, of which we only had a couple of examples. So we're going to try and add to that with some other developments that we can redesign that are denser, so we get a bit more clarity on that side. We are going to be looking at the operational costs as well. So we did capital costs. We're now going to be looking at the operational costs of those redesigned systems. We're going to be looking at a number of different stewardship options, ranging from water companies down to community level, and the costs associated with those. But not only the costs, also looking at the carbon implications of such systems. I mean, I'm working on the pretense that it is a more sustainable solution often, but it may be that it only becomes more sustainable when you get to a certain scale. And I think it'd be really interesting for us to be able to compare that both to existing sort of centralized supply, but also future supplies, which may well be more carbon intensive if you consider that we may need to look at desalination as a serious option. So that will look at whole life carbon, and it will look at whole life costings associated with reuse schemes. That we're hoping to have that work finished by the autumn, which will then give us a better indication of this. It is indicative though, and we really need to make that point. Each of those each development will have a slightly more bespoke, but it gives us an indication of kind of the scale of costs associated with it. And obviously it's completely dependent on your contractual arrangements when it comes to the maintenance and operation of it. But we're looking at kind of both the maintenance, but also replacement of certain elements within that reuse scheme. So yeah, we'll be sharing that wider as we go forward, and hopefully that will give people a bit more clarity on that side of things.
Thanks, George. Another thing to watch out for. Janet Dunnett's made an interesting point in the chat. So she's saying that we also need to ensure that any existing buildings that are retained and repurposed into homes have that water reuse infrastructure installed. Janet, I don't know if you want to say any more on that point. If you're happy to put your camera on and say hi, but no worries if not. I want to put you on the spot
there as you're eating your lunch, Janet, I imagine. Well, on the basis she hasn't come back on, I mean, I think she's right that there is, and if I've read her question correctly, this is saying when we're looking at repurposing buildings, can we retrofit this in? I guess it's depending on the scale of retrofit that we're talking about, and if there is major changes to wall configurations, to I guess utilities within the building, then I see no reason why we shouldn't incorporate it. The reason it is so much more expensive to do the retrofit is just because you are having to significant replastering of walls, for instance, additional pipe work in potentially tighter spaces. So where if you've got the opportunity and you're opening up voids, then there is no reason why you wouldn't explore that as an option. I think I see that as a form of new build in those instances.
Thanks, George. Sorry, couldn't get to the button and I was eating my lunch.
Yeah, you're allowed to eat over lunch, Janet. Don't you worry.
Very succinctly put. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Good to see you, Janet. Thanks for your comments. I can't see any more questions. Oh no, there has been one that's popped in. Here we go. From Thomas. Do you think the attitudes of the public's adoption of water reuse or usage reduction might have changed considering the public perceptions of water companies? Oh, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, that is an interesting one, and I'm very mindful of this session being recorded. So we did carry out that survey with regards to the public first piece last autumn. I wouldn't have said that the perception of water companies was at a particularly high point in the autumn either. I don't know if it's fallen further, but it's fairly low as it is. What's interesting is I think the majority of people don't really want to have to worry about it and take that on. So there was quite a large appetite for having it delivered by others effectively. I think, although I work within water, my view is very much, quite frankly, I don't mind what flushes my toilet as long as it does it and it's not causing me a health hazard. But I don't really want to have to pay for an additional, annual servicing or pay for the additional energy of delivering that service than I already do. So having a centralized system and somebody else managing it, another organization managing it, is probably what my preference. And I imagine that seems to be the majority of other people's preferences. In terms of trust around water companies, I think we are really talking here about the supply side. I don't think the trust in water companies when it comes to water supply and the quality of water coming through your tap is at a particular low, although Bear Grylls may suggest otherwise with his contraption. But I think that there is there's an element of, we have a world-class standard within the UK in terms of the interruptions of supply and quality coming through your taps, that I would think that there is a general just towards water companies still we're doing that. But I don't think we have, we're not specifically saying that there needs to be water companies that have to do it. I just think there's an element of efficiencies of scale to a certain degree, and I guess it's what we do. So it's a really good question, Tom, and I guess we didn't ask that specific question in that public survey. Maybe we should have done. Maybe it's one to ask at a later date. Saffron, is there anything you want to add on that front?
I was going to say it's not in our document anymore, but there is a case study where they have looked at how they can change the public's perception in one development in how to teach them to be more mindful about their water usage. So, looking at how long they brush their teeth for and what they put water in and just day-to-day living. And they did it in quite an interactive manner. And I think in terms of the public with reuse, I think there is scope for people to be very open about it. I think the education just needs to be there personally. And that's not to say that the public doesn't understand. I think the public wants further understanding. Personally, for me, I'm a very inquisitive person. So I'd be sat there going, I just want to understand the ins and outs. That's all. I'm not saying people don't want it. I think it's just that education piece really that would happen. But there is, I think it's called the Downstream Thinking Program. They did quite a lot of educational pieces on it, and it's to do with flyering, having interactive days with children and adults. And it's a good case study to go look at if you're interested in that kind of thing.
Thanks, Saffron. And also to add, there's some relevant research that the University of Manchester and also the University of East Anglia have done on this. So with the University of East Anglia, they looked at a number of case studies of community engagement with water issues. And some of the findings from those are really pertinent to how you kind of engage new communities and new developments. So if we can get that on the chat, the link to that, that would be great. And then the University of Manchester looked at public perspectives and practices around water smart developments. And the issue of trust came up. So there was a general support for reuse. And I should say that this research looked at a smaller group than the public survey that George mentioned. So it looked at a smaller group. It was qualitative research. But it did support the fact that people were generally supportive of reuse, but that support was very dependent on trust. So I just thought it was worth mentioning. And it was trust in the technology, but also trust in the institutions managing or governing the system. But interestingly, there were trust issues with both privately operated organizations and public organizations. So that highlighted that it's not just about distrust in water companies, there's actually a lot of distrust with other types of institutions and organizations as well. So maybe we can get that University of Manchester article in the chat as well. I
think we've added
right,
it.
we're nearly out of time, and we've had a question in from Barbara. Do you have buy-in from the main developers? That's a great question. I would say, yeah, quickly in the project, we have got some big developers on board, and we've also got the Future Homes Hub, which is a collaboration of developers as part of the project as well. George, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
I think ultimately developers are saying, like, either just make us do it, like they're not opposed to it, and we've shown them that actually public are interested, but ultimately, unless there is a large stick making them do it, or a significant carrot, in form of incentive to do so, then they are unlikely to change their existing model to incorporate it. So we either need to mandate it or require it as part of the planning permission for particular areas. I would suggest mandating it more. I mean, even Thames Water have found that by dangling a significant carrot in their environmental incentives, it's still quite a struggle to get developers to consider it. So I think we've got buy-in in terms of developers aren't anti it, but we need to make them do it.
That's fab. So just as we wrap up, I just wanted to highlight the other webinars in this series. So we've got one next week that you can see there on climate resilient gardens, and then we've got one in early June looking actually at that University of East Anglia work that I mentioned around engaging communities and water issues. So do look at those, and we'll also be sharing the recordings from the previous webinars in due course, so that you can access all of that. So I think it's just for me to say in the last 30 seconds, George, Saffron, any quick call to action for the audience here?
Please respond to the building regs consultation, wholesome water consultation when they come out, and consider what is included within Saffron's document and what else is provided within enabling water smart communities. And then have a look at that case study map when it's live on our website, and let us know of any other case studies that may not be present, so we can make sure they're incorporated.
And to echo that, please either sign up to come to the launch event or open the document when it's launched.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much both for a really interesting discussion, and thank you everyone for staying with us. There was a lot of information there, a lot of things to go and look at, so please do engage and feedback your thoughts. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Bye.